Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live discussion about digital transformation. This is part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast episode. We record this podcast live every Tuesday. We take your audience questions. We cover all different types of topics here, and excited to be with you here today. I'm going to introduce our guests in just a moment, but today's topic is the future of digital transformation in capital-intensive industries. Very specific, niche sort of topic here today. I'm really looking forward to it. We haven't really covered this topic, but I know many of you that listen to and watch the show are in capital intensive industries and are trying to figure out how to use technology to automate and to improve those parts of your operations. We're going to dive into that here today in just a moment. But before we introduce our guest and start with the conversation, a couple quick things. One is we take audience questions, as I mentioned, so I'd love to hear in the chat any questions or comments you have along the way. Please just drop it in there. We're watching the streams from all the different platforms we're streaming to here today. There's about 10 different channels we're streaming to today. So wherever you are, we'll see it. Just pop it in the chat. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat where in the world you're joining from today, which city and country you're joining from. I know I'm here in the United States. I believe our guest here is in Europe, but I'll have them confirm that here in a moment. And we will would love to hear where the rest of you are from. This is obviously a topic that's of global importance. So I'd love to hear where in the world you're joining from. And so the future of digital transformation in capital intensive industries. Joining me to have that conversation is Mark Moffat, who's the CEO of IFS and also a first-time guest on this podcast. So Mark, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, Eric. I think it's taken us a few weeks to get this landed in our schedule. So I'm excited that we found an opportunity to chat about what's happening in the world of industrial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, better late than never. We finally got it. The stars finally aligned, and we finally were able to get this scheduled. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're not new in the role, but I had interviewed your predecessor in the past on this podcast. Tell us about how long you've been at the company and where how you grew up in the space and how you got to this point in your career, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, sure. I think perhaps in some senses, software CEO, I've got a bit of a different background to many of my peers in that I actually started life as a chartered accountant. So I've got a finance training and background, and much of what we do today, even more so the case in the world of AI, is all about delivering kind of returns on investment. So that training stands me in good stead. I'm not sure our CFO likes the fact that I've been trained as an accountant in my past, but there you go. I worked with PwC for 24 years. And in the last part of my career at PwC, I was working very much entirely within the context of kind of enterprise transformation, invariably always technology centric. So I've got lots of experience of implementing all of the, large packaged applications you can possibly think of, from all the way from Salesforce to some of the hyperscalers to SAP, and of course, more recently, clearly, IFS too. So quite a rich background and history. I've spent a lot of time in the industrial space, global telecommunications, and oil and gas and energy in particular. I've been at IFS now for 3 years, as you know, the first 18 months of which were as Chief Customer Officer, leading the services portfolio, working with the partner ecosystem, leading our support and our cloud operations organizations, which obviously put me in great stead for succeeding Darren, as you mentioned, in January last year. So almost 2 years in the job now.
Great. Yeah, time flies. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but I suppose it has. So, well, good. Well, so you've got quite the interesting career. By the way, you and I both started or had early years at PwC, so we had that commonality. I've also worked in the utilities industry and other capital intensive industries over the years. And I always find this industry, capital intensive businesses are just so interesting to me, partly because they're heavy duty industrial. They're pretty gritty. They're, hands on. There's so much cool stuff that happens in these spaces. How do you see digital transformation evolving for capital intensive industries over the next few years? And what do you see developing right now in capital intensive industries?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting segment of industry, in the sense that a lot of the businesses that we deal with are largely invisible to the general public, but yet they're underpinning the engineering, economic prosperity and growth. The nature of the industries that we are serving are construction engineering, manufacturing, aerospace, defense, telecommunications. All capital intensive, asset heavy, as you mentioned. that literally are underpinning kind of economic and growth and prosperity and development of mankind. And it's often when things go wrong that you realize the importance and the criticalities of these industries. Otherwise, they're not in the mainstream, so to speak. But like many, they're going through significant change, not least of which is what's happening right now, clearly brought around by the demand for AI and the critical dependency that's now put on energy and energy transition as well. So there's trillions of dollars flowing in every year to industrial assets, grid modernization, global changes in supply chain, reindustrialization of Western economies. And when you conflate that with, in many cases, labor shortage, it's kind of weird that we talk about labor shortage sometimes in a world where we think AI is going to displace a lot of employment, but it's certainly the case in many of the countries and industries we deal with. So in many ways, it's a kind of perfect storm of lots of investment, lots of prosperity, big moves, the advent of AI, and a real need for people like IFS to play a role in helping our customers really benefit from these big secular trends, so to speak.
Yeah, so much happening in that space right now, and the transition to of power sources and whatnot puts a lot of strain on grids, and there's just so much cool stuff happening that needs technology to support it. And I'm going to follow up with that. Just a question here in just a moment, but I want to turn to the audience real quick and say hello to some guests that are joining or commenting on where they're joining. Say League on YouTube joining from Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you for joining today. Sanjay is joining on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. Madhu Sudan is joining from Laurel, Maryland. Thank you for being here. Darian joining on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. And I appreciate you all joining and commenting on where you're at here in the country today. So going back to that point about just some of the changes in asset-intensive industries, and the power industry, you just gave a good example of how that's changing. What are some of the unique challenges when it comes to technology? So as we apply or overlay technology against the backdrop you just laid out for us, what are some of the big challenges that you're trying to solve for your customers, and how are they using technology like IFS to solve those problems?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really simple challenge that I still think exists for many companies that we deal with, in that lots of organizations have still got legacy application environments and multitude of heterogeneous application landscapes. And in a world when you read the mainstream media and there's all this potential with AI and the use of domain models and small models and large language models and robotics and digital workers, there's a lot of organizations that today are sitting there with existing estates that have been in place for a very long time, and the concept of moving that estate to something that's more modern, that can benefit from the application of AI, I think is a very real challenge. It was brought home to me recently when I actually forwarded an article to our chief customer officer about another development in AI. It's moving so quickly right now. And her response was something along the lines of, well, I'm actually at dinner with a customer right now, and they're talking about the end of their cloud migration happening in 2032. And it really made me stop and think. I'm like, actually, there's a very big challenge, for many companies to find ways in which to access this AI potential. We've designed for that, Eric, and we've got a number of ways in which we're helping our customers benefit from AI that's appropriate to where they're at on their application journey. But as a generalism, I think it is true to say that a lot of companies are still dealing with very legacy technology.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, just like some of the assets themselves that they're managing are aging and becoming harder to manage, so is their technology in many cases.
I mean, one example, perhaps just to build on it a little bit more, I was dealing with a North American utility very recently with the head of operations, and we were talking about some of the challenges in bringing together a unified view on data, and that data pertaining to life cycle data of kind of assets in the grid. Whether it be very simple things like transformer health. Transformers are critical in grid infrastructure. They're prone to failure. When they fail, they may lead to natural disaster, catastrophic event. And in this particular case, it's like, how can we bring together, all the data pertaining to that transformer, which we can then conflate against what OEMs describe is the maintenance routine required to get into much more preventative mode as it relates to trying to prevent, obviously, natural disasters. And that kind of capability isn't there yet on the market, and AI obviously allows for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually leads into a question I want to pull up here from the audience. It's a really good one. But I want to say hello to a couple more people that are chiming in or joining in the stream here today. Alex from Plymouth, Massachusetts. Thank you for being here today. We have Nash joining from Zambia on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. And then we have it's Rachel on LinkedIn joining from Wisconsin, USA. So thank you for being here today. And then Jennifer on LinkedIn has a really good question here. It cuts off a little bit on the screen here, but I'll read it to you, the remainder of it to you. The question is, with platforms like IFS growing in capability, many organizations still run a multi-vendor environment. For the CIOs in the audience, what's the most common white space or integration challenge that even a sophisticated platform doesn't fully solve, requiring them to look at to specialized partners or custom development? So what's the hardest part, do you think, technologically for a CIO to address in these sorts of industries?
I think it is the integration challenge, and particularly with the proliferation of agentic-based capability too. Like, how do you make choices? With the proliferation of solutions available, how many vendors can you take into your landscape, and getting that balance right on having a handful of strategic vendors that can work in concert together to give you the best outcome, I think is a real challenge. And if you look at the number of point solutions that are available right now in the market, startup organizations solving very, very narrow use cases, how do you stitch together that in a coherent frame that still allows frontline workers to have very simple day-to-day operating instructions? I get asked the question a lot about, what's the role of ERP and asset management and service management? What's the role of an enterprise software provider? Well, the nature of the companies that we're serving, the nature of the workforces that use our solutions, they're not using ChatGPT on the fly. They're not using Claude, up a telegraph pole. They need robust end-to-end processes that benefit from AI, it surfaced in the application itself, that still give a coherence to how they execute their day-to-day work. So getting that balance right on, the modern set of vendors and playing the vendors to their strengths is really tough.
Yeah. And speaking of AI, here's a question I love. I've never heard this question before. I don't think I've ever discussed this topic in particular, but it's a really good one. This is from Berend on LinkedIn. Berend says, assets are aging, but so is the workforce. How do you see AI addressing the aging workforce?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity here to codify, experience of an aging kind of workforce population. I was given an example recently of an aircraft maintenance engineer in an MRO facility who had 40 years worth of fingertip experience, as it was described. And how does one replace that in today's world when, certainly until this point, getting youth into those types of roles has been more challenging and more difficult. And then when you get the youth, in the broadest possible term, into those roles, how does one kind of teach and learn the same level of understanding a 40-year tenured aircraft technician might? And the answer, I think, is a multitude of different things. It's, what can one do to scrape the experience based on reports and inspections and casework that's done by that particular individual? Literally, is it about taking that individual and finding ways to transcribe the benefit of their experience, all of which is trying to build up a digital record of that individual's experience, and then surfacing that, A, for people coming into the trade, but B, for augmenting people who are in the trade today, so that they just get, a flywheel effect of all of that knowledge in that particular environment to help people in their day-to-day work. So they've got the intelligence at the point where they need it. A great example, or I've seen this play out in a slightly different example, is with the use of, so take that knowledge, and effectively you're codifying the experience of 40 years in that individual, replicate that by 20 people, you get quite a lot of experience. And if you build that into a model, and you can make that model available in a NVIDIA Jetson Edge large language model, and you can overlay that with a set of Ray-Ban glasses, and you've got technicians, younger technicians who are now making repairs, like real time, getting guidance on how to execute that repair. You can just see the level of potential that exists to ease that crunch on labor. But I think labor shortages are very real. I read this morning that in the US alone, there's like 1 million unfilled roles for skilled workers right now. half of those are in manufacturing.
Really interesting. So, as you were just describing some of this futuristic things that aren't so future anymore, they're here. You guys are building a lot of new bleeding edge, cutting edge technologies, and then you're trying to sell that software or get these old school industries in some cases to adapt to that software. How do you guys address that gap, or what do you see that gap looking like in terms of, the old way, the legacy way of operating an asset intensive industry versus now Ray-Ban glasses enabled by AI and all the stuff that's so different and just groundbreaking compared to what was even possible 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, and it plays well to how we've to date executed on bringing AI to bear for our customers. There are three approaches to that, Eric. Number one is, for our customers today who have our solutions or who are in project or are about to take our solutions, bringing them native AI capability in the core application that they've spent good money on today, they'll spend good money on in the future, making sure that they still get a return on that application benefits, over time for the proliferation of AI is number one. That's the baseline. We call that embedded AI, so to speak. That then, from our perspective, how do we overlay that, which is coming from A to B, with some more bleeding edge, nascent frontier technology? Agentic would be one example. So we have an agentic solution. It's a business that we acquired in June this year. It's called The Loops. They were already in existence. They had built all of the context layers, the knowledge graphs of what it takes to span heterogeneous application landscapes and create agent-based routines. So an agent can be developed, a self-learning agent can be developed, order replenishment, a really basic example would be one, where that order replenishment agent can aid a worker or can replace, in many cases, roles to automatically fulfill, replenishment of stock levels in a production process. 65 applications that they cover. They built that capability for us. So you've got the embedded, then you've got the agentic, which obviously can leapfrog you a little bit in terms of dealing with legacy enterprise technology. And then the third aspect is accelerated development, next generation bleeding edge technology bundled for a customer specific needs. And we call that Nexus Black. That Nexus Black team comprise world-class AI engineers, world-class data scientists, world-class UX designers who are working with our customers, working with the industries that we serve to identify the hardest to solve problems that could be solved potentially today with bleeding edge technology. So you bundle those three things, starting with the basic, as I mentioned, what you've got today, then we think we can really help play a role for our customers to benefit from AI, but do it in a way they can stage through it. And then when it comes to those Ray-Ban examples or other use cases, you're kind of deploying those use cases onto very coherent end-to-end value process flows that exist already today. And then the final thing I would say, and then I'll ask you next question, is that we've got the experience of dealing with these mission critical industries, and we've been doing that for 40 years. We understand the criticality of the mission critical operations that are often executed by our customers. So getting it right, getting it safe, but progressing the agenda is something we're very focused on.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, it's so fascinating to think about, how far, in some cases, how far behind some organizations are technologically, and then you start thinking about all this super futuristic stuff. And I think that's smart, what you're saying, replace what you've got, get that foundation in place, and then it's sort of like the exponential benefit and value you can get from there is pretty compelling.
What's often missing, I find, and when I deal with customers, and I try to spend a lot of time with customers, not just in a sales process, but in delivery and understanding, the experiences that they are having today, whether it be a CIO, whether it be a COO, whether it be a CFO, and how we can improve, right? And what alarms me is the number of occasions where, application vendors, as a generalism, they don't get down to first principles. What is it one is trying to achieve? What are the real frontline problems that are experienced by workers? Where is the trapped value in a business? And more often than not, a CFO, a CIO, a COO, they have a hypothesis on where there's trapped value, and they're very experienced people. And just coming down to those first principles and really working with them to think about how we can solve those things, 9 times out of 10 results in us bringing an MVP to bear, and developing that MVP, finding a way to productize that MVP for the customer in question. And if we do our job right, then what we're effectively doing is we're allowing ourselves to scale that same capability to the rest of our industry customer base.
Yeah, very interesting. And speaking of AI, coming back to the Loops acquisition, this question is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, you brought up the Loops acquisition. Can you elaborate on how that fits into IFS's broader AI roadmap? What specific gaps does it fill or new capabilities does it unlock for your customers? So maybe we could dive into that a little bit more. What does this mean in terms of your overall tech stack that IFS is offering to customers?
Yeah, I think a very simple way to think about it is it's wrapping our existing IFS application stack, but it's wrapping it in a way that kind of binds the Loops capability with other applications in a customer's environment. We're not naive enough to think we're going to be the sole vendor in a customer's environment, and there's always going to be integrations and there's always going to be boundaries to where the IFS perimeter exists. But in asset and service centric industries, which we know extremely well, what the Loops allows us to do is kind of run routines that go outside the perimeter of IFS application landscape to automate processes. A really good one, which is another super basic example, but we see a massive demand for this. It's stunning to me how many businesses today have teams of individuals who are rekeying orders who are non-EDI from a multitude of different sources into an ERP. And that is lending itself perfectly to a digital worker, as we describe it, for order management. And we're seeing massive take up from that. And it surprised me a little bit because I didn't think that the nature of that very basic use case would still be a thing, but it is. So it's allowing us to span broader heterogeneous application landscapes, and there's self-learning built into it. The other cool thing about the Loops, which comes next year, is that we're obviously, for the harder agentic capabilities and digital workers, we're investing time to make a template available, so to speak, to our customers. And we've got 10 that are available right now. There'll be 20 coming, 30, 40, 50. You get the idea as we roll this out. But we want to put this capability in the hands of our customers. So when they take a couple of digital workers, they take the platform. The platform will be available in Q1 to allow our customers to configure their own agentic capability. But it's, Darian, thanks for the question, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah. So it almost sounds like, or is it safe to say, correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misreading this, but it sounds like you guys are embracing the composable ERP concept, and you aren't necessarily trying to compete with, say, SAP or Microsoft D365 or Oracle Fusion. You're trying to stay true to what you have grown up in, the space you guys have grown up in, but you're also recognizing that there's always going to be needs for other potential technologies, and now you're providing a tool set to tie it all together. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think we're solution led and we're value led. Now, we believe that we're the world's leading enterprise application software company that's AI native, that it is number one for asset and service, asset lifecycle, right the way from capital planning and allocation all the way through to O&M further downstream. And that's our focus in the industries that we've been serving. We think that gives us massive depth beyond what others can match. But again, we'd be naive to think we're the sole source. But as we get into a discussion with a prospective customer, it often starts in one area. I need some help with maintenance planning. And as you get into the dialogue, you realize that maintenance planning is just the start. And in the context of maintenance planning, actually procurement and supply chain fulfillment in the context of maintenance planning would be a really useful addition and increases the overall ROI of the deployment of the application. So we end up with a composable solution, and composability has been something that's guided us from 2021 when we launched IFS Cloud, is absolutely the way we go. And what invariably happens as well, Eric, is we say thank you. We work with the customers to deliver the value that we can. We have value engineering that holds us collectively accountable to delivering the outcomes that we promised through the sales cycle, which we monitor extremely carefully, not just in the sales, but all the way through to execution. And if we do that job right and we deliver, what happens? Customer wants to take more.
Right.
They like what they get. They see the value. We've been able to track the value. We've been able to sign it off collectively. And the nature of the solution footprint extends in the context of what we want to be known for, asset lifecycle and service lifecycle.
Right. Here's a really cool comment that you might appreciate, Mark. This is from Alex, and I actually know Alex on LinkedIn. I know him because we've been connected a long time. He's a CIO, and it sounds like he's a customer of yours, which I did not realize. But Alex says, as an example, we are currently implementing Loops project to scrape email for PO confirmations and changes and automatically update IFS. This will be very helpful for planning. So that, that's a not simple, but that's a small microcosm, just one step in a process that if you could, I could see that being a pretty huge lift, in terms of just getting rid of that manual process that's prone to error and a lot of inefficiency. But what are your thoughts? Are you seeing other examples like this with how your customers are using Loops and AI in general?
Yeah, no, a huge number of examples like this that, again, seem very basic in their nature, but add huge value. In many cases, it's taking away from labor that can be deployed elsewhere. It's tasks that are prone to error, and actually it creates drag on fulfillment for customers. And this type of capability, you could tell by the nature of the question. Imagine you put a self-learning on that. The first time around, perhaps the PO coming in doesn't have all the supplier detail. The supplier detail gets updated. The agent remembers that the next time it sees an email from the same inbox. So it's constantly evolving, constantly learning, getting faster, getting more accurate, and increasing the overall customer satisfaction as well. But no, it's a great example, and thanks, Alex, for being a customer of the Loops.
Yeah, if you have any other examples, Alex, or anyone else, I'd love to hear it too, because I'm really fascinated by this path we're on as an industry where there's so many limitless possibilities of how AI could be used. But to see even just the smallest, most micro examples of how it's being used, I think that's huge, because then it gives other organizations ideas of how we could start deploying AI. And that's what I really like about it too, is that it opens up a certain amount of creativity and flexibility that you didn't really have with traditional ERP systems in the past. Now all of a sudden you can start thinking about creative ways of using AI to connect the dots between some of your inefficient processes and the full potential of what ERP systems could have and should have been doing all along. But now we've got a tool that can actually enable that.
I mean, there's no shortage of ideas here, Eric. That's one of our challenges. But having those three approaches I described earlier keeps us super focused on what return we're able to create for our customers.
Yeah. Now, if we shift gears and look at field operations, maintenance, and asset performance, how are you seeing AI change the way that companies are managing field ops and maintenance and asset performance?
I think the number one way for me, it's moving from reactive to predictive. If you can get more intelligence into the operation, so you can proactively be catering for otherwise downstream fails or maintenance planning, that's the holy grail as far as I'm concerned. One example that we're working on right now in the case of a utility, again, patrol crews, drive along highways, scanning for faults, for foliage coming across power lines, for rust, for all sorts of issues operationally. But we're trialing now use of Jetson technology and cameras to automatically detect early stage signs that couldn't be caught by the human eye, let alone at 45 miles an hour down a highway, issues in the grid infrastructure and transmission. And in that world, automatic triggers, automatic diagnosis, automatic triaging of early stage development of an issue, which then generates work orders, which then allows work orders to be deployed into crews who happen to be in that area incoming. You can just see so much orchestration and optimization of maintenance from that perspective. So I think the big shift for me is moving to predictive, and obviously all of the benefits you get that ought to be obvious. You don't have downtime, you don't have outages, you don't have potential loss of life in many situations. So that's the big shift for me.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned this early in this conversation. You were talking about the complexity of systems and processes in these sorts of industries, and you just hit on one that I think AI has the potential to solve finally, which is, I remember, it's been 20 years since I was deep into the utilities industry, but I remember how complex it was trying to figure out how to get geospatial data from a GIS system to interact with your ERP system, which tracks the more traditional, call it the two-dimensional data, like inventory numbers, part numbers, and warehouse bin locations and things like that. Now all of a sudden it's not as simple as just which bin location in a warehouse does my part exist. Now it's where in the hell is it in the field, of all these, thousands of locations it could possibly be. And so being able to convert that geospatial data into meaning and tying it all together, I imagine that could be a huge game changer for utilities and other field service type organizations.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a number of customers we're speaking to right now actually with our Nexus Black team that I've referenced, that are talking about inventory spare part optimization. I mean, huge. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars caught up in inventory that can't be deployed because of lack of insight and data. A very practical example, which I hadn't fully appreciated until yesterday, and I was speaking with an O&M provider of renewables, and this individual was describing to me that actually, the number of spare parts that sit in inventory have got a multitude of different applications into other tower stacks and wind turbines, but no one can untangle it because the OEMs label everything on a proprietary basis, and it's really difficult to see how you might use a gearbox from one asset in another asset, and therefore you sit on 5 times the inventory levels you need. So that is a capability we're working on right now with that one customer, and there are many more other like it. So this whole data aggregation, I think, is a huge area of opportunity for us.
Yeah, we've tried. We tried middleware 20 or 30 years ago. We tried other integration tools, and we still use integration tools, obviously, as an industry. But now AI can help. It doesn't solve all the world's problems, but it does start to provide another way to tie together all these data sources.
And I think one of the challenges, obviously, is we're moving from a deterministic world to a probabilistic world. And in a probabilistic world, you are entertaining, less sequential, less sequenced step-by-step analysis. So you do introduce a degree of risk, and obviously that's been a challenge with large language models today. They're not operating with 99.999% reliability. So how do you get that same level of reliability when you put a probabilistic model to bear in the example perhaps I've just given? And the answer for me is with the availability of mass computational capacity, it has to be about running hundreds of different scenarios that allow you to drive up the 90% reliabilities to something in the 5 nines. So that is a challenge, and that's something that is being overcome too.
Right. And you talked about the mission criticality of your client base, and how in many cases it is life or death situation, or at the very least it's critical to the economy. So you've got these mission critical operations, and then on one hand, that's what you've got on one hand. On the other hand, you've got innovation and leading edge technologies like we were talking about before. How do you manage the reliability and the need to be somewhat conservative and maybe risk adverse, for lack of a better word? You've got to make sure you're stable, you're reliable, you're not taking on any unnecessary risks in your operations and all that good stuff. How do you balance that with the innovative nature of what you're talking about? How do we bridge that gap or reconcile those two potentially competing priorities to be innovative versus reliable?
I'll give you a non-technical answer, and it's as simple as eyes wide open. You get into this dialogue and you get into pushing the boundaries with what is possible. And as long as you go in with a mind on the risks, and you go in knowing you're pushing the boundaries, and you find sensible ways, on a first principles basis, to design solutions that are capable of being rigorously tested against the risks you've described, then you always end up in a better place. And the technology often isn't the problem. It's moving the hearts and minds. It's getting people into the art of the possible. It's getting over the inertia that in mission critical operations you can't mess with it because of some of the things we've just described. So it's those types of motions. I was with a CEO recently of a large manufacturing chemicals business in the UK recently, and we talked about how to fabricate the next generation IT function in the future with next generation technology, and it was all a people-based conversation. How do I get my teams to accept the degree of change that's coming and to run towards it with eyes wide open?
Right. Yeah, you can be risk or you can manage risk and innovation at the same time, but it's going to be probably not palatable to just take on the innovation and the risk without having solid risk mitigation, solid planning, all that good stuff, all the eyes wide open piece of it. I think that's
and how can you bring additional data to bear to ultimately de-risk what would otherwise be seen as a risk? So if it's collective knowledge and experience in a business of generations of maintenance on a particular part of an asset, can you access OEM data? Can you access competitor data? what are the different dimensions that allow you to underwrite the quality of the decisions you take in the technology? Can you overlay that with weather? Can you overlay that with different modalities of data? Voice, video, pressure. There's an example which isn't quite answering your question or your statement that we're working on right now. Again, in a utility scenario, we're using robotics to inspect manhole ducts, and the robotics is gathering 20 different measurements every yard in a manhole duct. Pressure, light, video, gas sensing, you name it. So the more data you get, the more you can overlay it onto problem statement and thing you're trying to solve. Obviously, the more you get accuracy.
Right. Yeah, that's a good, really good point. Now, what about this is from Brand on LinkedIn. Brand says, for organizations excited about AI and in particular agentic AI, but hesitant due to data quality, data availability, and governance challenges, where should they start to unlock value responsibly?
Well, number one would be start.
Right.
Yeah, and find somebody you can partner with. The agentic capability is pretty early in its maturity. Something that we do all the time with our customers, and I'm sure others do too. So start, develop a hypothesis, understand the data you have available, what the maturity is of that data, in each and every data component that you're using, and then the governance just flows naturally from that, in the sense of having to take the decisions you do in order to pilot the capability. Now, what we do in the early stages, Bernd, is we make sure that we got human in the loop. So the agent will always have human in the loop until such time there's confidence that the agent can operate autonomously. And even then, in an autonomous situation, what we've built into our platform is agent lifecycle management. So everything's logged, everything's tracked, everything's secure. So in the unlikely event you have a problem, you've always got an ability to diagnose what happened and to roll things back if you need to. But I think the fundamental thing for me is, and I'm sure you would agree, this wave of digital work is coming. This wave of robotics is coming. And my encouragement to everyone, us included, by the way, in our business, because we run business operations as well. It might be different, Bernd, for yours. That's exactly what we're doing. We're starting, and we're making it feel uncomfortable. And when you make it feel uncomfortable and you get into disruptive ways of thinking and innovation, you always end up in a better place.
Yeah. So speaking of being in a better place, when you look at some of your more successful customers that have deployed the IFS core product or the loops or combination of the products that you guys offer, what is it that's made those clients more successful than others? Are there certain themes or certain lessons you have from some of your call it your top performing customers that have just done the most with technology and what you'd consider the most successful with their digital transformation initiatives?
I think, it's a bit boring, but whenever I've seen projects not deliver or face challenge, it's the same old things. It's a lack of governance. It's a lack of user engagement at the beginning. It's a lack of, to-be process design. It's the governance. When things go a bit wrong, not calling things out wrong early. In some cases, the vendor's not close enough and they become a bit of a scapegoat. It's all the basic things. It's about one-on-one project management, and the best implementations that I've seen have got those things right. And we were very insistent with big programs of activity. We want to be around the table. We want skin in the game, because we recognize that things do go wrong. If you're pushing the boundaries and you're delivering next generation technology, it's really hard. And it's really hard at the technology level. It's really hard at the hearts and minds level. And we know there's going to be problems. So we want to be at the table, and we do that in as many cases as we can, so we can play our part in that sequencing. But it honestly, it's those things I find. Pretty much every case where there's been a challenging situation that I've been called into, something in the program management, something in the governance has gone on. It's got nothing to do with technology.
Yeah. Well, and you said it's kind of boring. And actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking, that's, I think what we all should aspire to is let's make our digital transformation boring. Boring in that it's not chaotic. It's not a train wreck. It's not a mess. It's not a bunch of firefighting. It's actually deliberate and planned. And you've got a clear vision for what it is you're trying to do. And you win the hearts and minds, as you said, to use your words. I think that's the key thing. And of course, having the right technology is important, but the right technology doesn't matter if you don't get that other stuff right that you're talking about.
I met a CEO yesterday who committed to IFS, and he's put the program in a bit of a go slow. And I'm like, help me understand why you put it in a go slow. He's like, Mark, like, we don't understand what process we want. And we're going to run the risk. We're going to say to you, design us a system, and you're going to design a system, and you'll do the best you can. But if we're not clear on what we want, then, and you've not guided us on best practices, then we're just going to have a bunch of regret costs. And I applauded him. I was like, that's amazing. Somebody, senior business leadership position recognizes the difference an enterprise application can make. And in that case, it's finance and it's O&M and it's asset service. And he's put the brakes on at his cost.
Yeah.
And he's done exactly the right thing.
Yeah. Well, and he brings up a good point too, in one of the things you just mentioned, in that you mentioned it a few minutes ago about how the vendor can oftentimes become a scapegoat when something goes wrong. And I think as a leader, it's easy and it sounds good in theory to say, well, Mark, you're the expert. You know the technology. Why don't you just go figure that out? And I'm going to be over here, doing my other day job. And that's just never goes well. As smart as you are, as smart as your team is, as good as your technology is, that's just not going to work because it doesn't fit what that business needs necessarily. And so I think it's a good point.
It's why we invested 10 years ago disproportionately in value engineering. We put a lot of effort into, and in simple terms, it's making sure that we've got a very detailed case, a value case, which is, yes, about financial metrics, but it's also about non-financial metrics that are relevant to that company. And everyone at the beginning, through the life cycle, by the time we get to the end of the business case creation or the value case are super clear on what constitutes success. And that pervades all the way through the project life cycle and it pervades into go live and beyond. And unashamedly, we'll continue to invest in that, particularly in the advent of AI. Because unless you're tracking what you're solving for, and unless you can put it in P&L terms or other metric terms that make a difference to your business, then you're wasting your time.
Yeah. Here's a question from Jennifer. We sort of started to answer this, but I'll maybe we'll dive into a little bit more here. This is from Jennifer on LinkedIn. Jennifer says, Mark, in your journey from finance at PwC to leading a global enterprise platform like IFS, and Eric, through your experience consulting with hundreds of organizations, what's the greatest misconception that you've seen C-suite leaders hold about what it takes to successfully implement digital transformation? So what are your thoughts there?
Wait, they've asked both of us. You go first.
Yeah, damn it. I was hoping you would buy me some time there. Yeah, I'd say, probably the biggest misconception is what I just mentioned about leaders thinking that the vendor is going to solve all their problems and they've got all the answers. And it's not that they're not smart people. They don't know their technology. They, of course, do. But again, you have to have a clear vision and clear understanding of what it is your priorities are, what you're trying to accomplish. And I'd say this is even more important now than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago because of what we talked about earlier, which is there's so many things you could be doing with AI, but you can't do them all. So figure out what it is you need. And you go back to that example that Alex brought up around the PO or using AI to scrape the PO confirmation from an email and being able to update IFS automatically. That's a good example of where, hey, that's a pain point for us. It's inefficient. It would provide a better customer experience if we could just automate that process, whatever. And so having a very clear, deliberate way that you're going to use technology to improve your business, I think is important. And not having that, the opposite of that would be what I would consider one of the biggest failure points. And then I'd say the second thing is something you actually mentioned, Mark, which is winning the hearts and minds. If you can't win the hearts and minds of your employee base, this project's probably not going to go well. And you need everyone from executives to mid-management all the way down to the front lines. You need them all on board and excited and aligned with where the direction you're going. You're not going to get everyone that's 100% excited and committing their full-time jobs to it, but you do need a certain amount of commitment from the entire organization. So those are the two things I'd say is making sure you focus on those two areas. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to build on what you've said, I think to make it super explicit, I think often what's misconceived is it's really hard work. It's really tough. This stuff is not easy. And in some cases, depending on the nature of the technology that you're replacing, it's like poured concrete from 25 years ago. And it's built into the very fabric of the organization. So it's really, really hard. And then I think the other thing, which you've mentioned, but just to put my own kind of words on it, is the misconception that they don't need to sponsor it. Like, you need to sponsor it. You need to champion it. because guess what? People, people role model behavior based on leaders, and if leaders don't demonstrate their commitment to underpinning programs like this that underpin the very basis of a business, it's really hard. So those are the two things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And actually, Jennifer had a follow-up comment here that sort of encapsulates or summarizes everything you and I just said, which is, she says, insightful, shows the biggest risks are internal execution gaps, not the technology itself. And I think that's a good summary of the misperception that technology is going to solve your problems for you. It gives you a tool to potentially solve those problems, but it doesn't solve it alone. So those are good points. Going back to the leadership thing, in building on the example you were just talking about, the CEO who want to slow down a bit to figure out what it is they wanted to be when they grew up before they got too far into the project. What are some of the other leadership traits that make or break large scale transformations like these? In addition to, the fortitude to make tough decisions, you sort of alluded to that a moment ago. But what are the other traits that you expect or that you coach your client leaders on as they prepare to embark on these projects?
I think what I spend a lot of time trying to understand is, what's the business objective? What's the strategic end game? What's the goal? Like, we aspire to be, particularly right now in this world that we're in, we aspire to be a technology partner, not a software vendor. And in being a technology partner, what are the different attributes that make that business successful? Actually, individually, what's that individual's goals? What are they trying to do with the business? And invariably, I always find opportunities to evolve what we're doing for that customer to find a bigger way to meet that need. Equally, if I'm meeting with manufacturers and in listening to the objectives of the C-suite in the manufacturing domain, it might highlight some gaps in the solution, and that informs our M&A strategy, because we are active in M&A, and what we pride ourselves on in M&A is finding capabilities that expand the solution breadth and depth as it relates to asset and service life cycle, as it relates to the capital intensive asset heavy industries that we solve. But it's I think getting to the so what is super important, and finding ways to link what we do to the so what.
Right. Yeah, good.
It's more interesting, for our people. If we've got teams of people who are working really hard, because this stuff is really hard, when they can identify with the difference it makes, to the strategic objectives of the customer, guess what? Everyone's just more emotionally bought in.
Right.
And more prepared to go that extra mile. I am. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said before, it is difficult. The projects are difficult, but what you need to do to be successful, to power through those difficulties, isn't that difficult. I mean, it's simple what you need to do. It's just the problem is it's easy to get distracted by the wrong things and focus on or over prioritize the wrong things in these sorts of projects.
Yeah, we have a success offering, Eric, and one of the things that's really cool about our success offering is that it's obviously very relevant in the context of a project lifecycle, but where it's misunderstood and which has massive value beyond is the success team that are working with the customer in the life of the agreement we have after go live. They're constantly trying to find ways to improve. They're constantly trying to find ways to say, okay, we have an aerospace customer here that's using our software quite happily. What's the customer over there doing? And how are they using it in a new way? Oh, the latest release of the software is coming. What's coming? How can we get ahead of this? How can we take advantage? What's in the roadmap? Like, oh, roadmap, have you thought about ABC? Because that reflects the need in this customer and how their environment is changing. So when you get into that mode, you become that technology partner.
Right. Now, when you look ahead to, the next 3 to 5 years, which seems like an eternity at the pace that technology is changing right now. But when you look ahead, what emerging technologies or business models will most disrupt the way field service and capital intensive companies operate? What are the things you guys are preparing for in your roadmap?
Well, firstly, I mean, you're right. I mean, the pace of change right now, I think, is unprecedented. I really believe that. I mean, I've always been a voracious reader and watcher and learner. and I can't keep up some days. I'm like, what just happened this week? I still haven't looked at what Bill Gates has said about climate this week. I'm waiting for a moment where I can just go and understand, his perspective on that. So the pace is just relentless right now. And given that statement, I've forgotten your question. What was it?
What was I was enthralled with what you were saying, and I was actually
5 years out. 5 years out.
Yeah, 5 years out. I was getting a bit distracted thinking about a whole different topic, which was what you were just saying. We're talking a lot about AI and knowledge. Like, just think about, we're talking about technology and how AI is being used in the B2B world, but imagine just in general how fast the world's going to change with this additional knowledge, access to information, analysis, speed. It's scale. So sorry, that was a total detour from the real question, which is 3 to 5 years out. What problems do you think you're going to try and solve?
Yeah, I think obviously the proliferation of AI right now characterized by clearly consumer grade AI in the form of ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Gemini and others. I think most people will see the potential for it, and most people will see how that's evolved from a consumer experience perspective. Interestingly, some of that's rolling back now, though. I saw this week that ChatGPT are rolling back on being able to diagnose medical conditions. I've used ChatGPT a couple of times to help me with like what's going on there, so I'm a bit disappointed by that. But it's rolling back, which is super interesting by itself. But you've seen the rate of progression, and you can immediately think about the rate of that progression in the context of what companies do on a day-to-day basis, and that's the kind of thing that we're focused on. But I think the not yet fully appreciated technology that's going to make a massive difference is the prevalence of robotics. We actually, our board went to Silicon Valley relatively recently, and we met a robotics company whilst we're there. And I think we're all blown away by this humanoid robot and where it's at right now in its dexterity and its ability to carry out kind of tasks, albeit in a consumer type environment. But there's many applications for that in some of the industries that we serve. And then as we've looked at collaborations with other robotics firms, and we're going to launch a collaboration with one of those on the 13th of November when we host an event in New York, it's huge. And then you think about the unit cost of production of these robots when they get to a certain sense of maturity and scale, and the number of companies, whether it be the Elon Musk robotic, or whether it be the 3 or 4 other firms that are notable. It's just the capacity is potentially huge. That's before you even get to the capability of the Chinese robots. I saw one in Saudi last week, Unitary. It's huge. So the disruption that's going to create, I think, is not yet well understood, but will be, I think, the biggest challenge to be overcome in the next 3 to 5 year time horizon you gave. Now, what we're doing right now, in a sense of running to where the puck is going, as well as thinking about, the role of humans augmented by AI, the role of digital workers, and we talked about the Loops platform, and the role of robotics is, the field service, the asset management, the capabilities that we are developing are making sure that we're solving for that blended, orchestrated workforce, the future. But the robotics is the key thing, to answer your question.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point, which is, it's not just the physical acts that robots can perform, which is fairly staggering on its own. But when you look at the data that robots are capable of capturing, I think it's fascinating. And one of our clients, just to give a shameless plug to one of our clients, we consult with a company called Boston Dynamics out of Boston that makes robotics, humanoid robotics, other types of robotics, mainly used in B2B environments. And there's military applications and law enforcement applications as well. But what I found fascinating just from learning about this client is just how many data sources and data points that they're capturing every second. And so you combine that with AI and the whole, big data, Internet of Things trend that was already underway. And I could see how this could be a pretty big, I think exponentially, the possibilities are limitless. You were talking earlier about how when you're driving by 45 miles an hour down a highway, you're not going to be able to see a problem or spot a problem necessarily out in the field. But if you had robots out in the field, they probably could, and they could alert back when there is a potential problem.
Yeah, 100%. It's huge, and we like Boston Dynamics a lot.
Yeah, well, good. Glad to hear. We do too. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So this is actually, this is sort of part 2 of my question, and then I'll wrap things up. But this is from Darian actually on LinkedIn, but she's asking a very specific question. I just want to get your knee-jerk reaction, even though it is a very specific use case, but I like it because it gets us thinking about how AI might be used in the future. So Darian asks, looking ahead, do you see a world where predictive maintenance and spare part optimization merge into a fully autonomous supply chain where the system can not only predict a fault, but automatically order, allocate, and dispatch the right part?
Yeah, no, 100%. That's exactly what we're solving for right now. Exactly what we're solving for. And we feel particularly bullish about it, Darian, because we're a product-centric ERP company. We're fully invested in health of the asset and asset planning and asset maintenance, and we support field service. We support tens of thousands of technicians. We're now on, I think, 600,000 technicians globally that we support with our software. So we got that understanding of the total life cycle, and we see a world where somebody's dispatched on a optimized basis based on all sorts of things, skills, capabilities, routing, etc., and knowing what they're about to encounter, analyzed by AI. They put the right equipment in their vehicle, they get onto site, they don't have the right equipment, through natural language and indexing, automated work orders, automated ordering spare parts, automated fulfillment of that part to the next available crew. That whole world, absolutely, it could be fully autonomous, but it isn't going to replace in the short term, the woman or man who's in the field executing that task. And robotics might come at some point in the future, but I think for a lot of those tasks that we solve, that's still going to be highly skilled labor.
And so that leads to another question from Patrick on LinkedIn. Says, you invest a lot in AI, especially around ERP. From your perspective, when will ERP be fully autonomous? How far are we? So how far in general are we from what you just described, that future state that you said in the short term, probably not, you still need the human high skilled labor, but how far out do you think we are from achieving this future state vision you're talking about?
Yeah, I think for that example I've given, with the exception of the human in the loop, because there will be a human in the loop always observing and looking at exceptions and whatnot, and the individual carrying out the highly skilled work at the end, I think we're 12 to 18 months away. Okay. And when you bridge that into the totality of an ERP and all of the value chains that are executed, I think you're probably 3 to 5 years away.
Okay, interesting. Well, what do you want to leave us with in terms of where you're taking IFS, the future of IFS, any fun events, conferences? Just tell us what to expect here in the next 6 to 12 months, and how can we learn more about IFS for those that might be interested in learning more about you guys?
Yeah, well, we're always available. We're a very high-touch organization. We all spend a significant amount of time with customers in the way that I've described over the course of this conversation. That's what keeps us relevant. If we listen to what's happening in our customer base, like properly listen, not play lip service to it, but actually engage, and we respond in the capabilities that we develop, we think we're going to be in a high growth state for a very long time, based on what value customers are getting from what they tell us they want. So in some ways, it's super simple. A massive thank you to any customers. Alex is clearly on today, who've joined the podcast. We are here literally for you. And we're determined to be the #1 industrial software company on the planet, and with world-class asset and service capabilities that we're already recognized for. And we're so grateful for the opportunity to create the value we can for our customers.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's really cool to see what you guys have done in the last several years, especially with not just the capabilities you've built, but also the geographic reach. I think you guys have come a long way in terms of not just being a European focused company, which is nothing wrong with that, but now you've got more, I feel like, a more global brand awareness and recognition and client base compared to just a few years ago. So excited to see where you guys go. And it's a super interesting industry. So I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate you being here to talk about this.
No, of course, anytime. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to the audience for the great questions. Be sure to connect with Mark. If you'd like to learn more about IFS, we're not affiliated with IFS, but you can always check out their website at ifs.ai. Is that the website now, or is it still ifs.com? Yep. Okay. Yep. ifs.ai. So be sure to check them out. And we will edit this interview. We'll add some more content to it. It'll become part of our official Transformation Ground Control podcast that comes out in a couple of weeks. So thank you for being part of that podcast production here today. Go to transformationgroundcontrol.com if you'd like to watch the podcast on a regular basis. You could subscribe there, watch it on whatever platform you want, or listen on the audio platforms. So be sure to check that out. You can also go back. We've got a whole catalog of 240 some episodes that we've already had. So be sure to go back and check out that podcast. Lots of good stuff there. Lots of good guests there. And appreciate Mark being here again. Hope you all have a great day, and we will see you next time, same place next week. We'll be back with more content just like this in a live discussion. So thanks very much. Have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you.